actions that we, or some of the initiatives that we had put in place in the current year to prepare the candidates, essentially to address, some of the challenges that Kaya mentioned, and also taking into account the expectations as mentioned by Caroline earlier. What we've identified is that some of our candidates tend to struggle just on the day of the exam to suddenly switch up and perform at a higher level, more so at an entry level CA, if they have not practiced that over time. So what we then did was, we had to encourage change in behavior on a daily basis from a lot of candidates, which we refer to as the hashtag APC Lifestyle. And the qualities or characters of the hashtag APC Lifestyle came from the, candidates that succeeded when our pass rates in the Auditor General were dipping. So they had common characters, and for example, what the candidates were doing that were successful, they took full accountability for their own development. They did not wait for anyone to tell them, go study, prepare for this. And so they just on their own, made sure that they continue to learn. And they understood that learning is not limited to a particular class in Endunamo, APT or UCT for 2 hours and take a break for 2 weeks and wait, attend another one. They didn't do that, or just have a group session, discuss and take a pause. They didn't do that. So they constantly ensure that they are learning. So they understood what the exam is all about, or they at least tried to make sure that they know what is coming their way as far as the exam is concerned, so that they can do better. So they did not take it for granted. They were quite disciplined throughout the year and consistent, always planned their days and make sure that they accomplish what they plan on doing. So what they would ordinarily do, they would read a lot of business news. They would ensure that they understand what is happening in their environments, but not just read and forget, but read and apply their minds. Essentially just put themselves in those, if they're reading about an accounting issue, just apply their minds. What is it that they'll have to do if they were to solve that issue? How would they go about researching that? So essentially just sort of igniting a bit of practice and critical thinking ability on their own. So that's what they were doing. And even on the job, when they're doing their work, they try to at least perform at a high level, so, the reports that they do, the language that they use, the formats. So they try to improve their performance on a daily basis to give themselves a bit of practice such that come exam time, it's not a bit foreign, it's not too much of an adjustment. So they're used to that. And even on time management, they will try to at least make sure that whenever they're doing work, they at least submit it by deadline, or even better, before the deadline time arrives. So they try to push themselves over time. And that's something you can even now get started to practice and make sure that whatever that you do it at a higher level, such that come exam time, it's not a huge adjustment. If you're, because suddenly in the exam, you're expected to prepare a report for review by board of directors, executive and whatnot. So you need to already be knowing how to get there. And at times, when you talk to the candidates, Caroline mentioned earlier, we are technically good, but often you get to talk to the candidates, they'll say that, we feel like we're a bit rusty. We forgot a lot of things, or it's not that easy to remember things. So what the candidates were doing, they would ensure that, whenever we're on any topic that they feel like they're a bit rusty, they made it their own mission to make sure that they at least go brush up on the basic principles in preparation for the APC assessment, or just uplifting themselves in general, just to make sure that, they are up to date with all the changes in whatever accounting, auditing, tax, anything that they feel that they need to really brush up on. So that's what they were doing. So what we then did in the current year, we went on roadshows as part of the Capacitation Drive to try and, spread the very same message of good practices as far as what we saw successful candidates were doing, to say that, if candidates were to do this, I think maybe it would give them a better competitive edge into the APC assessment. So the target audience at the time, it was more the reviewers, the assessors, and evaluators. And the whole point was for them to at least, in that they spend more time with the candidates, to go further, cultivate the message down to the candidates, to say that, what, this is how you maybe need to try it out and practice and prepare for the assessment, and not only try and be a CA in the exam, but rather live that way on a daily basis. So now I'm going to talk to some of the initiatives that we had in the current year as well. The first one being the training auditor tactical plan. This way, essentially, the APC sessions, but these were not so much the replacement of the normal, programs that we have, the Endunamo, the APC, APT, and the UCT APC. It was just more a platform that allows candidates to be able to explain what happens when they get the pre-release, what goes on through their minds, how do they get to read, how do they analyze, how how do they get to identify triggers, and how do they go about researching that? And now how do they put that together on the day of the assessment? How do they get to combine the pre-release information in the IOD, and how do they get to respond? All those things, of course, guided by a facilitator, would then say that, this is how far you need to go, such that maybe you could, you are so that your responses could be assessed as competent. So that's what is happening. Another thing that we had was the IFRS e-learning. The IFRS e-learning was purely just a tool available for candidates that would feel like they're a bit rusty. Again, as mentioned earlier, even by Caroline, that, you've done this thing at CT and ITC, so you are good, these things. So, but it was just available for those that might feel like they're a bit rusty. They need to maybe brush up on some of the basics around any topic. And I mean, that's something you can do even when the pre-release period comes. So as you read there during your research period, you identify even the triggers. You have that opportunity to go refer back into your textbooks and consult on that and make sure that you brush up on anything should you need to lean on your technical knowledge as its expected foundation that you need to be able to demonstrate in the APC assessment. And another thing that we also found important is the employee wellness. It is important to be mentally and physically fit into the APC assessment. So what we made available is that, candidates at any time, if they felt, they need to talk to a psychologist for whatever reason, stress management, they can always do that, have a private session. But what we ordinarily do prior to the assessments would have sessions with, various experts, your someone who could, psychologists, people that maybe could take candidates through stress management, as sometimes it can be a bit hectic, especially with the expectation from the work demands and the academic demand. It gets to be daunting and stressful for some of the candidates. So we'd have those sessions to see how they can better be able to manage, the work-life balances. Would even have dietitians, as to what then they would have to eat, what they need to look out for, things to avoid, during the day, so that they can remain active and productive throughout the day when they are studying, and even in the assessments when they're writing. Another big thing that we always have is the 6-day APC intervention or simulation, if I can put it. This is essentially the, the simulation of the APC assessment, whereby candidates are completely off and they'll get a case study, or they could use any of the case studies from their programs or any of the past papers. During that 6-day period, candidates will essentially go into the research phase, typical to the pre-release period, and do everything that they would essentially do in the APC assessment under exam condition, and even on the day of the assessment, and literally write. And then, but what then happens is that there's now a facilitator who would say that, what, on the first day, these are the type of things that you should have identified from the case study that is given. This is how far you should have went. These are the triggers that you should have identified. And as far as group discussions is concerned, you guys should have discussed on certain topics. This is what you should have covered day 3, day 4, and essentially this is how your file needed to look like. And again, on the day of the assessment, how you then link up the file, having understood the file with what you would have prepared and what you are given on the day, combining those and then being able to respond as well. And again, touching on how well you need to respond to make sure that your responses are worthy of being assessed as being competent. So that's one of the big things that we had. And another thing is, because, in our environment at times, because of exposure, some of the candidates will say that we don't have certain exposure, maybe around financial management. We always had, also had the auditing and financial management refresher courses, but these were not full-blown whole year program. It was like a 2-day program on auditing and then a day and a half on financial management. And this touched on just the basic principles on, for example, on auditing, just the basic principles on what to apply, in order to be, when responding to auditing questions, what is that you need to take into account, all the important auditing methodologies or the difficult aspects around auditing. So it was just more highlighting those, or some of the things that candidates were struggling with over there since APC has started as far as auditing is concerned. And talk about the mandatory audit firm rotation, the planning stages, identification of risk, all those things is what will be covered, and understanding your role as a candidate in the APC scenario. What is it that you needed to do? How then do you need to illustrate the competent professional skills in a written format in the exam? All those is what was covered as far as maybe the auditing course was concerned. On the financial management one, typically the same things, just the aspects of, for example, the capital budgeting, NPV, your work, your cash flow are at a higher level, your valuations, discounted cash flows, just that candidates understand what is it that they need to do when they get the information. How do they get to deal with it? But I mean, it was a bit short, and it's something that even during the pre-release period, you could, once you see your triggers, you can already, spend some time into your textbook where you can, if you don't remember, and then come up with, a bit of understanding of the basics and be able to respond properly into the exam. Your strategy, your critical thinking, those are the things that were covered in the auditing and financial management refresher course. What we also had was the adjusted exposure to the cycle competencies. And I think Kaya mentioned earlier instances where you find that candidates going right, but they don't have exposure to all the necessary competencies. What we then did was to have some of the cycle competencies brought forward such that candidates could at least have the benefit of getting exposure on those ahead of the APC assessment. And I mean, perhaps in some of the firms, it might be that, they've been structured that way such that everybody before they write, they get exposure to all the necessary competencies ahead of the APC assessment. But on our side, that's something that we needed to adjust to make sure that our candidates are covered on that. I mean, I could talk more on other initiatives that we had. We had other motivational sessions as well. There were also, as part of the hashtag APC Lifestyle that I mentioned earlier, we would even advise the business units or offices to say that, whenever there's technical issues as far as the audit is concerned, allow the candidates to be the ones to research on those. Let them be the ones to run with their whole researching and come up with a solution. And as qualified CAs, you can already review their work and advise them where they fall short or how far they needed to go as far as the research is concerned. So those are some of the things that we had in place. And for me, what I think you can take forward into the assessment is that, put everything that you learned or absorbed during the year into perspective. Go all out in this preparation. Do not take it for granted. Reflect on the whole year's work. All the mistakes that you would have identified that you've done during the year, whatever stood between you and an HC assessment, try and address that. Look into that and find out how come they have this particular solution? How come they thought about this, but I didn't? What is it that has to go on in my head? How was I supposed to read? How was I supposed to analyze such that I can be able to come up with a solution? So you always should ask yourself, how come they have this thing in their solution, but I don't have it? What is it that I'm lacking? How am I thinking? How am I applying myself? What is it that is missing? What do I need to change next time when I read, when I analyze? How far do I need to go? And essentially, just to give a bit of clarity and even comfort for you on your side to say that, I think what I've done is enough. You can then know that, okay, what I did, I've covered everything as far as how I needed to think, how I needed to read and analyze, and I don't think I forgot anything. And the best thing is to make sure that you don't even repeat a single mistake that you ever did. So, another thing, take note of all the changes in auditing, accounting, the legislation text, etc., whatever the case may be, to make sure that come assessment time, if any of those could be brought in, you could comfortably be able to respond. I mean, now going forward, you need to capitalize on each and every day. And even in the pre-release, you need to go all out and ensure that your preparation is of a very good quality. The better your preparation, the easier it will be on the day of assessment. Not to say you then have to dump, as Kaya was mentioning, the information that you would have prepared. You need to make it applicable such that, you literally respond to the tasks that are given on the day. So you need to ensure that on all the triggers that you identified, I almost want to say be an expert. You are very good. You are clued up on what is going on. Understand your file quite well. Read it, understand it fully. You can't afford to go into the assessment not knowing some parts of the file. So you need to be actively present throughout the preparation, in the assessment, and even on the day of the assessment, all the day. So do not over rely on the groups. I know Kaya mentioned issues of group lines or giving people some tasks to do. You need to understand the work yourself. You need to make sure that into the exam, you're going to be the one. You're not going to consult on anyone or with anyone. You need to be knowing everything that you have in the file and be able to send on your own and respond comfortably, properly. So you need to plan your days quite well ahead of the exam, ensure how, be it your snacks, what you're going to be having into the assessment, how you're going to kill the whole assessment. I mean, there'll always be challenges, but you need to be able to manage that. Rest prior to the pre-release and make sure that into the very assessment as well, you go in fresh. Understand what is coming your way. There is no way around this whole assessment except through it, and you have to get it. There will always be that exam feeling that, I think is a bit of a challenge. But I mean, I always tell people, every time you look at the solution or suggest a solution, you'd realize that, no, man, these things are not as difficult. They're actually doable. All of them. Quite often you'd realize, no, man, all these assessments, I can actually pass them. So why wait? You might as well figure it out now and deal with it. So while you're getting that exam feeling, do not be distracted. Be formidable, remain confident, and trust that you got this and deliver beyond your expectations. And while you're at it, you cannot afford to relapse or fall back into the bad habits, things that deny you the opportunity to be able to do well in the assessment and deviate from the plan. Often when we go into the assessment, we say, you know what, I'm ready, I'm going to do well. This is what I'm going to do. But suddenly in the middle of the assessment, you start to lose that whole focus and now relapse into things that ordinarily wouldn't work out for you. So avoid that. The common mistakes, not applying your mind, avoid that at all costs. So do that, and however way you always dished up the solutions when you wrote during the year, go and double up that, demonstrate how good you are, convince the assessors that you are very competent. I mean, you are good, you're not here by mistake, you are here because you deserve this, and easily you can pass this thing. Ensure that you give valid responses, give reasons. I mean, I think Carolyn was also mentioning earlier, you need to apply this, show, explain everything that you do. You can't just say something's correct and leave it at that. Give reasons why you're saying that. When the pressure mounts, relaunch serious attack on the exam. Don't give in to it. Ensure that you keep on pushing, understand the task, the questions, everything that is given, such that you can, respond with greatness as best as we can. Fight all day long. Do not leave any, I would say, easy marks. Talk about the format, the language, the easy things that you cannot afford to miss. So make sure that you respond to the task that is given. Never slow down all the day long. Remain confident. Personally, I believe that you are capable, and you can get this. You are just as good. So be the missile that you want to be, and launch a serious attack at all angles the whole day. And before you know it, it'll be over, and you will be a CA. Thank you.
Thank you, Dira. I absolutely love that. Be actively present and learn from past mistakes. I'll go back to the questions we weren't able to cover earlier on. I'm not sure, Kaya, are you still with us? Okay, it does not sound like it, but I'll direct the questions to either Caroline or Dira. I think you might be able to address.
I am around.
Okay, great stuff. So the next question, which you didn't get to previously, was what would you recommend the approach on the day should be? For example, the time for reading the IOD, and allocating time to the tasks. Does one read the task first? And how do you approach each? You have a lot of questions. And how do you approach each task and the planning? What should that look like?
Is it for me or Caroline?
That's for you, Kaya.
Oh, good. Okay, so I have a rather different recommendation, and a lot of people tend to find it a bit too radical. So the way I've looked at this was to say, I don't have the mental fortitude to keep my mind fully alert for 8 hours, or as it happened last year, for 24 hours, which is what it felt like. So I always feel that if I don't have a detailed plan at the beginning of the day, by the time I get to the 7th or the 8th task after 3 or 3:30, my ability to identify and crisply, target what the key issues are is going to be very different to what it was at 8 a.m. So my approach would then be to say, before you start writing anything, you have to actually know what all the 8 tasks are all about, if it's 8 tasks, and also then detail what it is that has to be addressed in each task. So when I said earlier on that you must identify the questions and the key issues that emerge from each task, I would then detail it for all 8 tasks, so that by the time I come back after lunch and I decide to go with task 6, I already have an understanding of what it is that the questions that are being asked are and what the key issues that I need to tackle is. Because that then avoids this idea that I may be too mentally fatigued to actually even identify what the core issues are. And you get to hear from a lot of people that say that I got an LC here or I got a BC here. That, look, it was the last thing that I tackled. I did it at the end of the day. So as it turns out, the human mind's capacity to remain at full speed throughout the day just isn't the same for everyone. So that's the one thing that I really think people should consider doing in the morning. Go through all 8 tasks, identify what the key issues are, document them so that by the time you tackle them, you aren't missing out on obvious red flags. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaya. Sarah, I hope you're covered. If not, please let us know and we can go back there. I see a lot of questions are about sharing the indicator grid that you had previously shared on the screen, but I did see someone share it in the chat. Thank you for that. Then another one for you, Kaya, from Marumo. In the March APC, majority of the board members are not CAs. So when answering the tasks, I would have tried to be less technical so my audience does not get lost. How do I do this without risking being labeled as not showing enough technical competence? Kaya, that's for you as well. Kaya, if you're talking, you're on mute. Okay. Maybe Caroline?
Okay, maybe I can, yes, maybe I can help. I mean, I would say if you in a sort of a board, not everybody will be CAs, right? So I think we also need to take that into account. And I mean, I don't understand when you say not being less technical, what does that mean? But what, let's take any other task that they would ask you. They probably will tell you to give more or less information on a task. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at a task and you know what the issue is, that will guide you. Okay, so let's maybe go back and look at last year, the last question around the bots, because that's what you're asking. There were few issues that were happening there that don't really require anybody to be a CA or not. Like, you just need to more or less understand what those issues are, right? I mean, if you had a look at that last question, I'm trying to actually remember what the last question was, but let's just say the question was around procurement, and it was around the board getting involved in day-to-day and things like that. So what I'm trying to say is you don't have to be a CA to be able to articulate that having one supplier is not good, having like a board member being involved, non-executive independent being involved in day-to-day, it's an issue. So try to look at what the issue are and articulate that. Like, you definitely don't have to be a CA to understand those issues. So that's what I would say from that.
Thank you, Caroline. If Dira or Kaya would like to add anything to that, please feel free. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions, so that has been great. If anybody does have another question, please feel free to put up your hand or type it up in the chat quickly. But we're about to move on to our next session. So if we do not get any more questions, I would like to thank Caroline, Kaya, and Dira very much for your time. Thank you for dedicating your morning to assisting the candidates prepare for this exam. We appreciate your insights and we appreciate all that you have shared. Of course, you're more than welcome to stay on if you'd like to, but if you need to jump off, we fully understand. If any further questions come up, we will be in contact with you to be able to get the answers back to candidates. Thank you all very, very much.